Hi, everybody. Michelle Edmonds here with Making the Grade with Idaho News 6. Can you believe it is 2021? And although so many things still look the same and feel the same, education is yet again churning forward. And here to talk with me about it is Kevin Richert from Idaho Education News. Happy New Year, my friend.
Happy New Year to you, Michelle. Good to see you.
Good to see
Virtually see you, that is.
Of course, virtually for right now. Who
Yeah.
knows, Kevin? Maybe we'll look back on this though and be like, come this summer, we'll actually get to see each other. Who knows?
Who knows? We can always keep our fingers crossed that we'll end 2021 differently than we ended 2020.
Well, as we are joined by all of our wonderful viewers showing us on Facebook or across all of the different social media platforms that we have at Idaho News 6, we want to make sure that we are hearing from you, your comments, your questions regards to education, because Making the Grade is our chance to communicate with you directly as well. So Kevin, let's just start where we have to start, 2021. I guess a lot of people shaking their heads saying, unfortunately, but we are still in the very middle of this pandemic. So where do K-12 schools stand when it comes to coronavirus? I know at Idaho Education News, you guys have been tracking the numbers very carefully to see what kind of spread is happening either in the community or in our schools. What have you found when you're looking at the numbers?
Well, we did the tally on Monday, and I posted on my blog on Monday the up-to-date figures for so far this school year. And based on what the Department of Health and Welfare has totaled and released, we're looking at least 4,800 coronavirus cases that can be linked to K-12 schools. And that's a conservative estimate. We know it's higher, we just don't know how much higher for a couple of reasons. Basically, Health and Welfare does not release numbers for every school. They only release numbers for larger schools, schools of at least 50 students, that is. So smaller schools, you don't find out what's going on with students and teachers because of privacy concerns. And some of Health and Welfare's own numbers are a bit of an estimate. It's a minimum number of cases in some schools. So we know it's at least 4,800 cases, and that's out of more than 140,000 cases statewide. So that, to put that into context. And what we found out as we looked at the fall numbers, and we just sort of summarized where we stand right now, the largest hotspots are all in high schools. And that stands to reason for a lot of reasons. First of all, there are more kids and more staff in high schools. They're just larger facilities. So if we're just tracking raw case numbers, stands to reason that you'll see more cases in high schools. But also, high school is a very different environment, as we all know. Students are moving from class to class. They're passing each other in the hallway. They have extracurricular activities. And we'll be talking about extracurriculars here in a little bit. High school students work outside of the school day. They have more of a social life maybe than elementary school kids and junior high school kids. So for a lot of reasons, it shouldn't surprise us that the highest case numbers are in some of these high schools. And you can see as we scroll some of the highest numbers in high schools in the West Ada School District. Mountain View, Meridian are near the top, Eagle High School, Rocky Mountain. So not really much of a surprise with a lot of these numbers.
Well, and you should mention here too, Kevin, that the Boise School District has been remote since after Thanksgiving. So if people are looking here and seeing a lot of the West Ada schools, and CUNA, they're on the list as well, when you're looking at Treasure Valley schools, and you're not necessarily seeing the Boise School District high schools, that has to be a direct correlation, correct?
You would think. There's definitely a correlation. I don't know if there's a causal link, but definitely Boise high schools have been online since for several weeks now, and will continue online and are continuing online this week and into at least the middle of January. We'll see how that plays out in the next couple of weeks. West State has been in a hybrid model all year, or most of the year, has been in a hybrid model since since the fall.
I don't think, and please join us if you're here on Making the Grade and put your 2 cents in. I don't think anybody would be very surprised to see that high schools are the hotspots when it comes to schools. Did the Department of Health and Welfare give any context to the release of these numbers. And maybe it's too simple to say, oh, these are actually more positive than we thought, or oh no, we're in a negative trend here. Was there any sort of context, or was there just a release of the numbers?
And not particularly, and really what it came down to, it really wasn't a new release necessarily from health and welfare. It was a matter of, I wanted to look at these numbers, and we link to this report every week, and I would urge parents, staff, if you're interested in what's happening in your school, look at the report for yourself. You'll be able to see the numbers for the past couple of weeks, and you'll be able to see the cumulative numbers for the year. What I did on Monday was I just looked at the cumulative numbers, and I just did the math, because the health and welfare spreadsheet doesn't provide you with a sum total. You have to do the math yourself. And as I did the math, I found out that really we were looking at least 4,800 cases, and it was a lot higher figure than I had thought it would be, and a lot higher figure than I'd been reporting about back in December, because the cumulative figures are always being updated. The state will release weekly numbers, and you'll get a weekly report, but some schools report their numbers on a monthly basis. Some have really no set schedule to report their numbers to health and welfare. So what health and welfare has been doing all along is plowing those new updated numbers into the cumulative total, but those new numbers are not reflected in those weekly reports. So that's how I got curious about why we were seeing so much higher numbers in the cumulative totals as opposed to what we've been seeing in those weekly reports. So it was kind of a lesson for me as a reporter about how to read health and welfare's reports and how to reflect what numbers they're seeing in the schools. So it was a little bit of a math exercise for me that I kind of explained to readers along the way.
Well, and I appreciate that, because transparency is, as you're trying to slog through the numbers on a weekly basis, you don't necessarily have all the information at your fingertips, as you're saying.
I mean, when we tallied the numbers in December, and it looked like it was about 3,300 cases in the K-12 schools, and that's what I reported. But the actual cumulative figure is like I reported on Monday, more than 4,800. That's a big difference. And we wanted to make clear what the numbers really are, what the discrepancy was, how we get from 3,300 to 4,800. And, going forward, I think, the best way to figure out exactly what's happening in the schools is to, run that exercise and go through all of those cumulative figures, because they're changing in real time.
Just a little more addition for you. That's okay. It's making a great.
It's fine.
Yeah. It's math class.
I have a calculator on my phone and on my computer. I'm good.
Okay, so on that note, Kevin, does it surprise you at all that Governor Brad Little has decided to update his state plan when it comes to spectators at school sporting events? And this was something that a group of people, including a lot of educators and education leaders in the state, petitioned the governor's office to make this change so that more spectators could watch specifically high school sports, but sports across the board at schools. And so now, as the way I read this new recommendation, is that each player or cheerleader or whoever you're trying to watch would be allowed to have 2 spectators in attendance at an event. So I wanted you to not only talk a little bit about that story, but also maybe put it in context for us with what was just released in your blog about the increase in numbers in the schools. Are these two things going hand in hand here?
I think what you're seeing here is definitely the governor's office heard from people who wanted to see that 10 spectator cap eased up and increased. So there was some pressure, there was some lobbying. Education groups, back before Christmas were urging the governor to take another look at the 10 spectator cap. So what the governor's office said about change is that they're trying to strike a balance between accommodating parents, allowing parents to attend sporting events, and trying to keep that spread to a minimum. Because, obviously any kind of gathering runs the risk of leading to a spread. And as Sammy Edge reported on this on Monday, the change in the policy also comes with some safeguards. I mean, there are guidelines that spectators need to follow with regard to social distancing, with regards to face coverings. So that, that's all part of the equation as well.
Kevin, we have talked about many times here on Making the Grade as the pandemic has unfolded since March. School districts have been really wary of where they stand because of liability issues. So how does this new proposal make sure that districts are not going to face any kind of liability?
I think that's got to be a factor as well. Sure. That's been a concern with schools all year in terms of their legal exposure, their liability exposure. So yeah, I think that's part of this as well.
And districts can make different decisions, correct? They don't necessarily have to follow this order. They can stay with the original stage 2 order as much as I read about it.
Right. That's the way I would read it as well, that if a school wanted to go with a more strict requirement, they could do that, but they would not be able to go above 2 spectators per participant.
Interesting. Well, we'll see how that all shakes out and how the different districts decide to respond to that. I wanted to get to a story that I know you've spent quite a bit of time studying over the years. We talk about supplemental levies. So for people who maybe give us a little bit of a civics lesson first in
Yes.
What is a supplemental levy, in case you didn't realize that you were paying for this, many of you. But districts all across the state have run supplemental levies for years. The difference this year is that a new record amount has been raised.
And not really new there. I mean, it was a record for the 5th successive year. 92 school districts across the state have a supplemental levy. So the civics lesson is going to be a refresher course for a lot of patrons, because if you live in really just about any school district in the Treasure Valley, I'm running it through my head here about most every school district in the state, and certainly most every school district in the Treasure Valley, has a supplemental levy on the books. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about a 1 or 2 year property tax levy that voters approve with a simple majority. And school districts can use that money for teacher salaries. They can use it for books and supplies and computers. They can use it for transportation. They can use it to cover employee benefits. It's money that the districts can use for any number of purposes, but it's short term. These levies are only on the books for 1 or 2 years, and school districts then have to go back to patrons and ask for a renewal. And that's what you see a lot here. A lot of these supplemental levy elections that we see, that we talk about over and over on this segment, are repeat levies. They're a continuation of a tax levy that's already been on the books, and in some cases, levies that have been on the books for decades.
And school districts can ask for this money numerous times during the year right now. But we should mention that there are plenty of levies that fail, and then districts have to come back with either a different look at the levy, or, for example, the state's largest school district, West Ada, did not have its levy pass in May. They brought essentially the same levy back to voters in August, and it did pass.
Right.
So it's fascinating to see what can change in just a matter of on voters' minds as well.
Right. It doesn't happen very often. The track record for school districts passing supplemental levies is pretty high. The vast majority of these levies do pass the first time around, but you're absolutely right. West Ada and Middleton as well this year ran supplemental levies in May, in June, in conjunction with the 2020 primaries, and those levies failed. Now, West Ada and Middleton both came back in August, which is another election day that's available to school districts. They ran the levies again in August, pretty much an identical proposal to what had failed in the spring, and those levies passed the second time around. The short civics lesson here is that right now, under current state law, school districts can run a supplemental levy in March, they can run it in May, they can run it in August, they can run it in November. They've got 4 election dates available to them. The majority of these levies do run in March, so I would anticipate that even though we're in the middle of a pandemic, come March of 21, we're going to be talking about a lot of supplemental levies on the ballot across the state. That's the most popular date to run these levies. But yes, they do have the option, if a levy fails, to come back and run the levy again. And that's caused some consternation in the legislature. There are some lawmakers who want to tighten up election laws and election guidelines because they think that school districts are being overly aggressive, pursuing repeat levies, going back to voters, second time around on levy proposals.
Stay on that train of thought there, Kevin. As legislators were to look at this graph that you have at idahoednews.org, if anyone wants to go and look at it directly, and they see the uptick essentially year after year after year in school districts trying to raise more money, what is the debate going to be about funding education at the State House in the next couple of months? And will this kind of graph make any difference?
Well, yeah, I think you've got some legislators who will look at this graphic and will say that this is a sign that the state is not doing enough to fund public schools. These are called supplemental levies, but many school administrators really bristle at that term. They say, no, this is not supplemental. We need this money. This is essential to backfill what we're getting from the state, to help balance the books, to help keep teachers in the classroom, to help boost teacher salaries at the local level. So, yes, I think there are going to be some legislators who look at this graphic, who have looked at this graphic in the past and have said this is a sign that we're not doing enough for public schools. I mean, on social media, one legislator already did that this week, John McCrosty, a Democrat from Garden City, who's also a teacher. He posted to this story and he said, this is a sign that the state needs to be doing more for public schools and for school funding. So I think it's a talking point in the debate. It's already been a talking point in the debate, and I would anticipate that it will continue.
It's going to be a strange year at the legislature, Kevin.
Yes.
As you well know, you
Yes.
cover politics and education in this state for a very long time. And I'm not just talking about whether or not masks are going to be allowed on what floor and how that looks. I'm not talking about any of that. What I'm talking about is the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic and there could be record revenue in the state of Idaho, and where that money goes, how it's configured, and with a governor who has literally, to me, called himself the education governor. So I'm asking you to look in your crystal ball as we get ready to move into the ledge time here, but how does this all sort itself out, especially considering that graphic on supplemental levies?
I think it's going to be a tough session. I think it's going to be a very contentious session because when you have a record surplus, at the legislator's disposal, at the governor's disposal, there's going to be a lot of debate about what to do with all of that money. And the governor will set the tone on Monday. He'll do his State of the State address. It's probably going to be in a different format. It's not going to look and feel the same as the State of the State has looked and felt in previous years. But the thrust of the State of the State address is still going to be the same. It's going to be the governor laying out his agenda for 21, his blueprint for how to spend money that's available, and in this case, how to spend a record-setting surplus. So he's going to start that dialogue, but legislators are going to have very different opinions and very sharply differing opinions within the legislature about what to do with all that money. I think it's going to be a very tough session, and that's not even talking about the sheer logistics of holding a legislative session in a pandemic. How do you put 105 legislators, hundreds of interested Idahoans, lobbyists, staff, reporters in the same building, and how do you do that safely? That's a big challenge in and of itself.
One of the other topics that is going to come up in the legislative session has already surfaced, as we knew it would, and we're talking about, when it comes to education, new academic standards. So rewriting the academic standards, that falls on the shoulders of the State Department of Education to do some rewrites, with the State Board of Education being the oversight there. But Kevin, if people are wondering, what do you mean they're rewriting these standards? Can you give us a tiny bit of history about why they're going to rewrite the standards, and also the difference between academic standards and curriculum.
Yes, there's always been a lot of confusion about the difference between curriculum and standards, and we'll get there in a minute. But let's talk about the history and let's set the stage. For the past several legislative sessions, you've had a lot of debate over these academic standards, the math and the English language standards, which have been aligned to the Common Core movement, and the science standards. What we had happen in 2020, this feels like ancient history because it all happened before the pandemic when we were covering a more or less normal legislative session. The education committees agreed to require the state to go back to the drawing board and rewrite the academic standards for math, English language arts, and science. Now that's a 2-year process. So if you're wondering what's going to happen at the 2021 legislative session on academic standards, the answer is nothing. Nothing of substance. There will be discussion, I'm sure, about the standards, but there will be no decisions made about new academic standards. That's all going to happen in 2022. So we've got this process that's beginning with working groups writing new proposed standards. State Board discussed these draft proposed standards in a meeting on Monday. Legislators, I'm sure, will weigh in. They already are. They've already expressed some concerns about where they think these standards are headed. But we won't have the debate. We won't have the showdown. We won't have the vote at the State House until 2022. So a little bit of a pause in the debate at the State House. But this issue isn't going away anytime soon. And again, what are we talking about when we're talking about standards? It's a blueprint for what students are expected to know at a certain stage in their academic journey. A 4th grader should know how to do this in math. A 7th grader should be able to master these English language skills. So it's a blueprint for where students are expected to be grade by grade, but it does not lay out how to get there. The curriculum, how these subjects are taught, that's a decision that's made at the local level. That's always been a local decision. So if you're concerned about your curriculum, your child's curriculum, if you're concerned about the tests that he or she is being expected to take, textbooks that they may be using, that's really a local decision. That's really something that's being figured out by local school trustees, local school administrators. So that's a local issue, but academic standards are a state issue.
It will be interesting to see how much play that gets during what, as you said, will probably be a very divisive legislative session coming up anyway.
There's going to be plenty to talk about this next legislative session. So having a little bit of a breather on academic standards is, we'll have plenty of other things to be talking about.
Well, including, I want to hear, because you just got off an interview with the State Board of Education talking about go-on rates. And right now we're talking about specifically, the state has a huge goal of trying to get so many students either to go on to college or to get a degree or a post-secondary degree to move on after high school and continue their education in one form or another. And Kevin, you have found out by crunching the numbers again that there's been a pretty big drop off in the go-on rate. Maybe not a huge surprise considering the pandemic, but you have to ask why, if there are any other reasons besides that.
Yeah, really not surprising in the middle of a pandemic. But what we're seeing happen this year is fewer high school graduates from the class of 2020, high school seniors who graduated last spring. Fewer high school graduates going straight on to college or going into professional career technical education. The drop off, the numbers here basically are that the go-on rate, the immediate go-on rate, went from 45% last year to 38% this year. So 7 percentage points. In terms of students, we're talking about about 1,400 students, 1,400 fewer high school graduates doing something to continue their education. And we could see this coming. And we've been talking about this and reporting about this, that the colleges and universities were already seeing decreases in the number of first-year students coming from Idaho high schools enrolling on campus this fall. So these go-on numbers shouldn't be a big surprise, but they are a concern. I spoke to the state board today for a story I'm going to publish later this afternoon about, well, what happened here, what caused it, and what's the path going forward, because you laid it out really well, Michelle. Why we care about these go-on rates, why we care about these go-on numbers, is that the state is really hoping that more high school graduates do something beyond high school, whether it's 2-year college or 4-year college or career technical. They do something to continue their education. So when students don't continue their education straight out of high school that following fall, the concern is that, maybe somewhere along the way, students, their plans change, their intentions of going to college. Life happens. Kids get a job, young adults get a job, they decide to stay with their job, maybe they get married, they start a family. It's tougher to go to college and begin a college career when you're married and you have maybe a young child at home. So the concern is that if students don't, keep moving right after high school, there's a chance that they may not ever go back to school.
I wanted to bring in a comment. Jana's joining us, Kevin, and she says, imagine what the go-on rate will be after this year. Did you get a chance to ask the state board as you were interviewing them today about this in particular? Are they worried the drop-off will continue, specifically with the class of 2021 because of what we've been going through? Or are they hopeful they might see an immediate rebound because people were so uncertain last spring and summer?
It's a really good question, and I'm glad Jana asked it. The short answer is the state board is worried about the class of 21 already, and they're concerned because of some of the things that they're seeing. So we've talked about the FAFSA. That's the application that students and parents have to fill out to get federal financial aid. It's also the same form that they need in order to get a share of the state opportunity scholarships for college. The FAFSA completion rates are down, I want to say, by about 14% from where they were a year ago. Fewer families are filling out the FAFSA, and the concern there is that if fewer students this year are filling out the FAFSA, maybe they're not going to be continuing their education after high school. So yes, the state board is worried about what they've seen with the class of 20. They're already worried about what may happen with the class of 21. And I'll get into that in more detail in the story.
We'll look forward to that, and we'll continue to make sure that we are looking at idahoednews.org. That's where you can find all of the stories that Kevin and I have been talking about in the past half hour. Kevin, before I let you go, let me just bring in a couple people who are joining us late. I wanted you to recap a couple of the stories that we were talking about. Rebecca's asking us, I missed what's happening with school districts. So Rebecca, the answer there quite quickly is that we've seen an uptick in coronavirus cases from the state level. And Kevin, explain again where we were back in December, where you thought we were, and where the number of cases are today.
Right, where we are right now is 4,800, at least 4,800 cases that have been tied to the K-12 system so far this school year. And that's a higher figure than we thought it was back in December. Just crunching the numbers, accumulating the numbers, we're at least 4,800 cases. And we know it's higher. We just don't know how much higher it is.
And Allison is talking about another one of our stories we were discussing, and this is the governor's decision to allow more spectators into specifically high school sports, but school sports in general. Allison, I get it. Wish my kids' pep band could still play. I get that too. I don't know.
I was a choir kid in high school. I mean, I wasn't an athlete. I was a choir kid, and I absolutely get it. It was the most important part of my high school life. And if that had been taken away from me, it would have been devastating. So I get it too.
And David, I want to bring in your comment because you're joining us as well. My middle school kid is screwed this year. I'm not exactly sure what exactly. David, if you want to join us more and say that. And Idaho does not care. Kevin, this is still really hard on parents. And a lot of us are starting up the school year, the new year with school in some sort of remote form, in some sort of total online form, in yet a changing format. So I just want to acknowledge to parents out there that Kevin and I are parents too, and we get it. We definitely get it. And it's rough. And if we're looking at go on rates, I'm sure the State Board of Education is worried about the trickle-down effect, even down to middle schoolers because of this pandemic.
Yeah, I think that everybody's feeling the frustration and the fear and the concern.
David's showing us her education this year is a joke. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I also know that there are plenty of teachers out there who are working their tails off trying to make sure that their kids, as in their classroom kids, are getting the best education possible. So as we've been saying at Idaho News 6, we're all in this together, even though we're not together.
No, and I'm scrolling down, looking at some of the comments too. One of our commenters was talking about getting teachers vaccinated so kids will get back to school. That's something we're going to be watching very closely. That's going to be a big story for us in the next few weeks, watching what's happening with the vaccinations. The plan is for the state to move into the next phase of vaccinations where school staff and teachers can get the vaccine. So we're going to be watching very closely to see how that unfolds, what kind of timetable we're looking at, what kind of opt-out rates we're having with teachers and staff. So that's the next phase of the story, and I think a really big phase of the story.
I can't wait to be able to cover that with you. Kevin, it may be 2021 and we may not be seeing each other in person, but my friend, I do appreciate doing Making the Grade with you every week.
Appreciate the time, as always.
If you'd like to read about any of these stories in depth, if you'd like to have the links to click on to get to all of the information that Kevin and the staff at Idaho Ed News use to make sure that they are giving you the accurate information, it is all at idahoednews.org. You will also find at idahonews6.com, we repost Kevin and the gang stories all the time there as well. So if you want to click on those and also get the apps, that's another great way to make sure you're following up on all of these stories. And Kevin, we'll look forward to your Go On Rate story coming out this afternoon.
Yes.
Thank you so much for everybody being here for Making the Grade. We'll see you back here next week.
See ya. Thank you.